gustan pasar a sentarse. Pasen. referente. Ha enseñado por más de 39 años y publicado libros y artículos en revistas revisadas por colegas. Recibió el premio Ron Maxwell de la Conferencia Nacional de Aprendizaje de Escritura entre Pares, uno de los honores más reconocidos del campo. El profesor Rafoth es considerado uno de los fundadores del movimiento de los Centros de Escritura y es un mentor de investigadores, teóricos y practicantes de centros de escritura. In the world of writing centers, Ben Rafoth can be said to be a benchmark. He has taught for over 39 years and published books and articles on writing centers in peer-reviewed journals. He received the Ron Maxwell Award from the National Conference of Peer Tutoring in Writing, one of the most recognized honors in the field. Professor Rafoth is considered one of the founders of the Writing Center movement and is a mentor to researchers, theorists, and practitioners of writing centers. We are honored to welcome Professor Rafoth this morning to present an instrument of social justice for writing centers and programs, using dialogue to support linguistic diversity and inclusion. Welcome to Guadalajara, Professor Rafoth.
Gracias. Gracias por la introducción. Discúlpame, mi discurso es en inglés. I would like to thank Maestra Paula Zuleika y Departamento de Lenguas, the conference organizers, university leaders, members of the Congreso, university students, staff, and faculty. Thank you for inviting me here. Today we meet here on the beautiful campus of ITESO for the Congreso Internacional Latinoamericana de Centros y Programas de Escritura. This year's conference is focused on the relationship between writing centers and programs and on academic writing and orality in native and foreign languages. Interculturality, inclusion, and multilingualism help to define this relationship. Nelson Mandela said, "Without education, your children can never really meet the challenges they will face. So it is very important to give children education and explain that they should play a role for their country." Explain that they should play a role for their country. What role should students, tutors, teachers, and schools play for democracies like Mexico and the United States? Countries which struggle with issues like interculturality, inclusion, and multilingualism. And how do we explain or teach this to them? Whether private like ITESO or public like my university in the US, colleges and universities strive to understand cultural differences, to expand inclusivity, and to support linguistic diversity. They do many of these things by means of language education policies and curricula. But these are big, abstract ideas. They seem beyond our reach. And so for those of us here today, an important question is, what claim do writing centers and programs have on social reforms like inclusion and multilingualism? Or to put it another way, how can writing centers and programs play a role for their country? To answer such questions requires us to look closely at things we take for granted and to see them in a new light. This is what artists do they not? They take familiar things and they put them in a new light for us so that we can see them differently. Las grandes obras de arte nos mueven el tapete. In Pittsburgh, where I live, Andy Warhol studied graphic design and became famous for transforming the way we see ordinary objects, like his image of the Campbell's soup can. This is now one of the most recognizable works of art in the world. In Oaxaca and in New York City, Rufino Tamayo's emphasis on composition forces viewers to look at the whole painting. Octavio Paz said that what made Tamayo's paintings unique was the presence always of the sun. And in Mexico City, Frida Kahlo transformed the self-portrait into symbolic expression. Her use of color and light celebrate diversity, feminism, and minority rights. And so, like these great artists today, let us look closely at something we often take for granted, the one-to-one conversation. I could say dialogues here, but dialogues are abstract. I think conversation is a more concrete idea, so I'm going to say conversation. We live in a world where the social bonds between people and their leaders feels like it is falling apart. In the US, I see violence, xenophobia, sexism, and racism, and I ask myself, what can I do about these problems? I am just a writing center tutor. We all wonder at one time or another, what difference does my work make in this crazy, upside-down world? What is special about tutoring and teaching writing? To answer this question, I believe we must start with two facts. One, we are all teachers and tutors. And two, we have the greatest impact on students when we talk with them one-to-one. We impart knowledge so that students can grow and have productive careers and lives. But what is a career without freedom and justice? What is communication if we do not connect with our fellow human beings? What is the point of writing if one writes only to oneself? And what does one hear when he lives in an echo chamber? Mandela said that education should teach students that they must play a role for their country. This means teachers and tutors must play a role for their country too. I believe it must be a role that uses conversations to build relationships that bridge differences and advance the causes of justice, freedom, inclusion, multilingualism, and equality for people of all languages and cultures. Of course, bridging differences is difficult because humans have so many differences: cultural, religious, linguistic, economic, individual, to name only a few. Our students embody a rich diversity of languages, cultures, and experiences. With the greatest number of Spanish language speakers in the world, Mexico is also home to more than 60 indigenous national languages. Like Mexico, the US has one dominant language and many additional languages. In the US, about 53 million people, or 1 in 6 Americans, are native or bilingual Spanish speakers. Students and faculty who speak a variety of languages and dialects come to the university to learn, teach, and grow intellectually in and through language. At the same time, our schools strive to accommodate differences, to teach people to respect one another and overcome prejudices, and to reinforce the values of equality and justice. Teachers and tutors dedicate themselves to their students, And they do this because teaching is not like most jobs. It is a calling. It reinforces values that bind us together as human beings, like respect for language differences and justice for all people. Octavio Paz said, "No one is alone, and each change here brings about a change over there." The 17th century Anglican poet John Donne said, "No man is an island." In other words, these great thinkers tell us we are connected to one another. The question is, how do we teach and tutor in ways that bind us together as human beings? We know that teachers do more than conduct research to uncover truths and share knowledge. They build relationships. Teachers and tutors possess a superpower. And this superpower is the ability to start and sustain conversations. Teachers and tutors have the power to say, "Let's talk about the ideas in your essay." Or, "Tell me, why did you say that?" And once they are started, conversations become ways of thinking. They shine a light into the dark and dusty corners of our minds. They become the rug that moves under our feet. Conversations are different from lecturing, correcting, or advising students. They are based on a relationship. When we think about this for a moment, we realize that we all crave conversations that allow us to slow down, sit down, think, and talk with someone we know and care about. The psychiatrist and author William Glasser observed that what students lack most in schools is an intellectual relationship or conversation with the teacher. Glasser was talking about students in the US, but I think it applies to students everywhere. Let's pause for a moment to recall why conversations are so fundamental to our well-being. We sometimes take them for granted, but it's important to remember that conversations breathe life into universal human values. For without conversation, these values would not exist. For example, conversations enact such values as respect for the time and space that people need to express themselves. We teach students to listen when someone starts to speak and to respect silence. Acknowledging the existence and dignity of others. We teach students to listen rhetorically, to avoid judging, accusing, and blaming people. Curiosity. We teach students to ask questions and participate in dialogues. Knowledge and truth. We teach students to say things that are true and not to say things that are false or misleading. Evidence. We teach students to make claims only when there is evidence and to examine and challenge evidence. Assertiveness. We teach students to stand up for themselves and let their needs be known. And the peaceful resolution of conflict. We teach students to compromise and to forgive. Keeping these things in mind, let us now imagine a writing center where tutors and writers sit together, perhaps across from each other, at a small table or side by side where they view a computer screen. If we could listen to what the tutors are saying, these are some of the things we might hear. Your writing expresses very strong feelings. Why do you feel strongly about this topic? Let me ask you, do you think some people might feel differently than the way you do? This sentence makes a broad generalization. Can you think of any exceptions? The people you are referring to, do you think they would agree with the way you have described them? How do you think they would describe themselves? I see I misunderstood what you were saying. Thank you for clarifying. When you walk through a writing center, you might hear tutors make comments and pose questions just like these, because such questions are the basis of relationships, which then spur critical thinking. Writing centers are small factories for critical thinking. But these factories do not operate by means of traditional power like electricity. They're powered by alternative sources of energy, conversation. And like other alternative forms of energy, they do not flow evenly. Like the wind and the sun, conversation energy can be disturbing. Conversations sometimes disturb ideas we have grown comfortable with. This is why conversations often contain pauses, hesitancies, raised voices, and arguments. Ideas rise up and fall away. Positions shift, attitudes change. The flow and tumble of ideas reflects the superpower of conversation to transform thinking. Conversations build on relationships, which then bridge differences anchored in respect. And respect is the seed of justice. Conversations do not change one's thinking right away. They act slowly but steadily, and like the wind, they eventually carve mountains. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky discovered the link between conversation and thought. Children build learning partnerships with adults and then go off on their own, at first repeating what they hear adults say, and then gradually internalizing it. Finally, they make it part of their own internal dialogue. This inner speech, as Vygotsky called it, becomes the engine of consciousness. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could instill critical consciousness in our students and in one another just by having a conversation? Paulo Freire would be pleased. Think of how many problems we could solve. But we know this is not realistic. Conversations are not magical. In fact, conversations are imperfect. But even though they are imperfect, we can still learn from them and grow from them. Let us look closely at one tutor's reflection on an imperfect conversation. The tutor was interviewed by one of my graduate students, Elizabeth Witherite, as part of research she conducted several years ago. And in this interview, the tutor reflects on a session in which he decided to prioritize the writer's ideas over his use of African American vernacular English. Hearing the tutor speak, we can ask, did he do the right thing? What would you have done if you were the tutor? Here is what the tutor told the interviewer. I tutored this student from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the US, big city. I asked him if his instructor had a policy about using slang, and he said he didn't know. He wanted his paper to sound academic, he said. So maybe we should have worked on that, but he also wanted me to make it longer, at least 3 pages. And he had less than half a page. I didn't want to offend him or anything, but he had double negatives, no in English, verb problems, incomplete sentences, punctuation, that sort of thing. We could have talked about the slang, but I mean, really? I'm going to say, now do you realize that you have used African American vernacular English in your writing? Too rude. And anyway, that's the way he talked. So he wrote it, and who was I to second guess it? So I figured the main thing was to get more ideas down and worry about the writing later. So that's what we did. Actually, we never did get to the grammar stuff because we talked mostly about his topic, which was his younger brother. But was this right? I felt responsible, you know? I mean, not for the writing, but to at least let him know. And I didn't want the Writing Center to get in trouble either for not helping him with his grammar. But he didn't even have a complete paragraph, and he needed 3 pages. If you were the tutor in this session, what would you have done? What do you think you might have learned from this conversation with the writer? Because conversations help tutors grow and develop too. New picture. Writing Center directors are responsible for preparing tutors for a multilingual world that respects interculturality and linguistic diversity. Helping tutors reflect on their experiences is important because tutoring involves talking about ideas, and ideas are often personal and sensitive. Knowing when to bring them up and when to move on is an art, and it is easy to take the wrong step. I'd like to share another example of a tutor reflection with you. This time, a tutor describes a time when a student expressed a belief the tutor found offensive. The student happened to be one of the tutor's classmates. The tutor had witnessed the student arguing with the professor about, quote, how brains differ in different races. The student wrote an essay on this topic and brought it to the Writing Center one day when the tutor was working. But instead of challenging the writer to defend his racist belief, the tutor avoided the issue. This is how the tutor described the session to the interviewer. He was so adamant about his belief because his professor embarrassed him in front of everyone. It was tough. So that was one of those things where I just kind of like submerged emotion and just worked on his writing style and just talked to him about his style. Some people might argue that's the wrong thing to do, but I didn't know what else to do. I just made a decision and went with it. I share this example with you because it describes a real event in my Writing Center where students and tutors have opportunities like this one to talk with students about their beliefs and prejudices or remain silent. In this example, should the tutor have challenged the writer's facts? Conversations are a tutor's superpower. Are there times when it is acceptable for a tutor to respond with silence when a writer says or writes something offensive? Tutors can use their superpower in at least 6 ways. They can use it to listen carefully and with an open mind. They can use it to seek clarification, question assumptions, challenge facts, register offense, or urge some type of action. They can use their superpower in these ways because they establish a relationship. In the classroom, teachers can excite students about ideas, but outside the classroom, in libraries, cafes, rallies, and protests, or in the Writing Center, these are places where educators can establish a relationship with students and move the rug under their feet. These are the times when education changes hearts and minds. The anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Professors have many students. It is not possible for them to converse with every student. This is why we need writing centers where tutors, especially peer tutors, build relationships with students and influence them in ways professors cannot. Tutors can use their superpower in sessions where prejudice is suspected and the values of inclusion and multilingualism are threatened. Before I conclude, I would like to add this. In the U.S. today, there is an urgent need to promote the values of inclusion and multilingualism because the forces of racism and hatred grow stronger. And in my country, they have also been promoted to the highest levels of government. For the many Americans like me who want to see change, the question of what can I do has never been more urgent. We can and we should do many things. Speak up, fight back, protest, run for political office, vote. Conversation does not replace other forms of activism, but it is important to know that the work we do as tutors and teachers does make a difference. So for tutors and teachers who might wonder, how does my work contribute to a more just, inclusive, and tolerant society? Given the magnitude of the world's problems, how does being a tutor matter? I believe there is an answer. The thing we use and practice every day, conversation, plays a vital role in the struggle to promote justice because conversation changes hearts and minds. Socrates taught us this almost 2,300 years ago. Dialogue between one person and another is probably the most effective teaching tool of all time. Though conversations about the ideas students write about, through conversation about the ideas students write about, writing centers connect students with their peers and professors, and by extension, with the larger world of knowledge and values. Conversations open students' minds. They also disrupt prejudices and false assumptions. One-to-one conversations have this power because they begin with mutual respect and dignity, and then they advance to sharing feelings, knowledge, and truth. Critical thinking emerges, perhaps not until after the conversation is over and the seeds of change take hold. As the Reverend Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Gracias por escucharme. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to meeting you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Professor Rafoth, for an inspiring plenary. On behalf of ITESO, please accept this diploma. And we have a gift for you. This is, I don't know who's bringing it. It's a handcrafted piece of copper from Santa Clara del Cobre in Michoacán. Yes.
Gracias.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ahora les voy a compartir algunos avisos especiales de parte del comité organizador